Welcome to the Main Character Podcast, where we share a collection of personal stories to create community and inspire real conversations. I'm your host, Brooke Taylor, and today's main character sharing her story is Michelle Townsley. Hello, welcome. I'm very excited to have you.
My name's Michelle. I work at a church. My home is originally Oak Park, Thousand Oaks, Simi Valley area.
So, how is your childhood and growing up there?
So I grew up in Oak Park, super suburban little town, had super nice house, had my mom and my dad, and I have two siblings. And then I also have a cousin who's like a sibling because she lived with us for 5 years. Yeah, so grew up there, super normal childhood. We lived on a cul-de-sac, so we just had neighbors that were our age. We played outside all the time, walked to school, had a great young childhood. So my aunt, and she became a housekeeper for a family that lived in Oak Park. So when we moved out to Oak Park, my aunt was like, oh my gosh, there's a family that lives down the street. They have a daughter that's Michelle's age. And so my mom was kind of like, yeah, that's great. We'll definitely, make that happen. But she wasn't going to do it kind of thing. She's not going to show up at someone's house. So one day, this family shows up at our door and they were like, hey, we heard that we're kind of your neighbors, down the street, blah, blah, blah. They come in. It was a mom, a dad, and a daughter who was 3. From that day forward, best friends, hung out every day, all day after school for probably all of elementary school. So we were best friends, super close, and just had a normal childhood. Right before middle school, I went to a Christian camp. And when we were at camp, I would think it was the second or third night, I had this moment where they were giving the gospel and I started shaking all over, so nervous because I just knew, I was like, this is true. What they're telling me is true. And if I don't make this decision now, I'm going to regret it. I just had this overwhelming feeling, and it felt like weight was crushing down on me. I felt glued to my chair. They were telling, kind of the way they were doing it was hey, if you want to make a decision to follow Jesus, stand up in your chair or stand up now. And I was terrified, and I looked around and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be the only one. I'm so scared. But I just had this overwhelming feeling if I don't stand now, I'm going to regret it because I know that this is true. And so they kind of said okay, now. And I looked over and this one girl shifted enough to where I was oh, someone else is going to do it. And I stood up, and there was actually a few of us in our group that had stood up. But I just had this overwhelming weight that I felt. And so then, they kind of ended the service. They had everyone leave in silence. And then the people who had stood up, their counselors stayed back and would talk to them okay, about what's going on in your heart and stuff. So we had 10 people stand up in our group that year, which was crazy. And so we were all sitting in a circle afterwards in the chapel, and we're talking. And my counselor is okay, everyone's dead silent. Everyone's emotional and crying and stuff. I wasn't yet. I was just frozen in fear. And my counselor goes, okay, Michelle, why don't you start us off? How are you feeling? And I was the second I tried to speak, I just sobbed. I just sobbed, and it felt like the weight lifted for the first time, I think. Yeah, it was the first time I knew that my life was changed forever. And then probably around middle school, we were struggling financially. My family just lived, I didn't know it at the time, but we lived way beyond our means. Basically, we just hit a bunch of financial problems. So we ended up moving out of our house in Oak Park that we lived in our whole childhood. And then, so we just kept moving further away from Oak Park. So we were in a different part of Oak Park in a little condo for a bit, and then for a year. And then during that year, we found out that my mom and my dad were getting a divorce. And so that was kind of, I think, the first really, I I think, real entrance of like emotional pain into my life. For me, I kind of remember that as a very like shattering experience. And mainly because we didn't understand. We were like, why won't you go to counseling? Why? Everything seemed so normal, like nothing had changed between them. So it was just very confusing and out of nowhere for me and my siblings. And I was very close to my dad. So he was the one who would take me to sports. He was the one who would we would play basketball together all the time outside. Like, we were just super close. And like the fact that I was good at sports was like the biggest deal in my family. So yeah, so I probably had the closest relationship to him out of my siblings. But so kind of like as things started to progress, it's the night that my mom told me and my brother that they were getting a divorce. I immediately like went over to my friend's house and cried with their family. Like, that was like the first thing that we did. And so it was kind of cool. Like, I had a second family throughout a lot of like a hard time. So during that time, like, we had to move again because my mom was like a stay-at-home mom. And now she had just gotten a job because of the financial troubles and stuff, but she couldn't afford to take care of 3 kids on her own, kind of thing, with the house that we were in. So then we moved further away. We moved to Thousand Oaks, into like a smaller place. And my dad had helped us move and stuff. So things seemed like not so bad. And we were all mad at my dad because he was the one who had decided like that they weren't going to do counseling. They weren't, like, it was done, kind of thing. But so just as time went on, like, more information started to come out where it was like, oh no, my dad was having an affair and had been cheating on my mom for like over a year, at least. And we kind of just like started piecing things together of what was happening. And so then it became more of like, I don't even know this person. Like, who are you and how could you do this to us? And he just knew that we were mad at him and stuff like that. And eventually he just moved to Texas without telling us. Him leaving was kind of like the beginning of the snowball effect. When my parents' divorce happened, and it was kind of my first, like, kind of that shattering effect where it felt like it shaped the way I viewed everything. And I think it was the first time I realized, like, oh my gosh, people go through real pain. And it like opened my eyes to the struggles of other people too. Like, I remember just realizing how many kids in my grade had divorced parents, and just like started opening my eyes. And so yeah, so with that, like, it felt like, I always describe it as like as if the color like drained from the world, like you start seeing things in like sepia. Like, I just was depressed for a while after my dad left. And but I remember I started leaning so much more on my youth group and my church friends and my friends' family, because I just started to realize that my friends at school like weren't that great. When I went into high school, I actually started being more confident in myself because I had good friends around me and I had my church and like great leaders and stuff. And so, yeah, like that kind of marked a shift in just getting a little bit more serious about my faith, but still struggling, And during that time, so when I was in the 10th grade, I just think like lines, especially with how close we were and the family and stuff, it was hard for me to recognize that like something was changing. And my best friend's dad was involved. He was an elder at the church. Like, they were just very, like, they were in the church and I really trusted them. So elders are like they're kind of like the decision-making board of the church. So sometimes the pastor is usually an elder as well. But they're basically like men that have been chosen out of the church body to help lead and make decisions like for the whole church. They were well known in our church. Their family was just super, like, everyone's like, you have the perfect family. Like, just like that was and they really were like just super genuine, awesome people. And yeah, like they showed it in my life and stuff. But I think that's the thing with, there's no perfect family. There's no perfect people. Like, and I just think when we put that facade on people, or we put that idea, you just make a standard that people like can't reach. Mm-hmm. And I think that really just leaves room for the enemy to come in and lie. And like, so eventually what happened in the 10th grade was that I was being molested by my best friend's dad.
How does it go from I am going there for love and support to then becoming something that's no longer supportive and loving?
Denial, I think, is a big part of it. I think the enemy is so just like sneaky, where people feel the need to cover up their sin because they feel like so ashamed of it. Where I think about if my friend's dad had been real from the beginning about where he really was at and like what he was really struggling with and stuff, it's like it could have stopped from progressing anywhere. Really, it just started happening slowly and over time. And I think because they were like a family to me, there were already boundaries that were crossed, and not realizing it. Like if I looked at other dads, like I had another really close friend at that time. Her dad would never, like when I look back at it, it's like I can see where there were boundaries crossed, where it was like her dad would never even be in the same room as me when I was alone at her house, because I had like several close friends where it was like I had the keys to their house and they would just let me in, and whatever, I would sleep at some of my friends' house and take naps and stuff because I was just struggling, like, and so I look back and see like, wow, there were a lot of boundaries crossed, but at the time I was so enmeshed in their family that you don't even see that happening. It kind of started out with like I was always in pain from sports. And so like I had back issues. I had like whatever. And I think he had worked some sort of like physical therapy. He had some sort of background in it. And he would work on his wife all the time. Like she got migraines and stuff. I also got migraines. So there were just things like that where it was already normal in their family that he would like work on his wife's back and stuff like that. And so at some point it was like, and it was so innocent where it was like, I like am complaining about my back or like how I'm in pain. And his wife is like, or my friend's mom, she's like, oh, well, you should have him work on your back because like it helps me so much, blah, blah, blah. Like so innocent, but then you look back at it and you're like, that should have never been allowed. And so that's where it started, is it was like physical therapy. But then I was being molested.
And did you know that, like, as it progressed, did you start to be like, hey, maybe this is
wrong? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just think denial is so strong and real. I think this, like going through it myself, has given me a lot of sympathy or empathy for people who walk through this. It's like you think, like you look at that from an outside perspective and you're like, why wouldn't you have immediately like run? It happened slow and incrementally. The stage was kind of set up for a disaster where I'm so reliant on their family. They help me in so many ways. They gave me like a laptop for Christmas one year that like they weren't using, and I, like my family couldn't afford to like get me one. Like just like things like that where we were so reliant and so trusted them that I think it was just kind of set up for a disaster where it's like it happened slowly, it happened incrementally. I would make excuses in my head like, oh, he didn't mean to touch me there. Like he didn't mean, like he always gave me a hug before I left. And I'd be like, oh, it's just because they're loving. Like you just start making, they're Christians, they wouldn't do that. Like just start making excuses in your head, and then it goes further. And then it becomes like, it's still denial. Like you're still like, I can't believe that this is happening. And so, yeah. So, I mean, there were times where once I knew it was happening, but you can't let yourself admit it. I can distinctly remember a time where I was sitting in her room upstairs doing my homework, and she wasn't there and her mom wasn't there. Her dad was downstairs. And I remember him coming upstairs and asking me like I just remember feeling like, oh no, like I don't know what's about to happen, because I was completely alone in their house with him. And I remember just being like, I think trying to like make it so clear that I didn't want to talk to him, and like so that he would leave. And he was like trying to make conversation and stuff, and then like asked me if I was in pain and whatever, and I was just trying to be like super clear that I needed to do my homework. And I just remember like he kind of like slowly walked out, and I just remember being like like, and fine. I think those types of moments were the times where I was like, oh gosh, like this could get much worse. Like I could be raped. I could be like, I don't know. And the thing that's crazy is that it wasn't always like it wasn't always when I was alone. Like there were usually other people in the room. like when these things happened. And so I think like that in itself is just such a like testament of how we need to be watchful and on guard, you know, and things like that. But these things happen like right under people's noses.
And so was the mom or your friend aware?
My understanding at the time was that she did not know. I had moments where I would look over and be like, is someone seeing this? Like, just so, like, half wishing people would, like, see it and half wishing, like, they would not, kind of thing. And I was just in denial. Like, I knew it was happening, but I still couldn't tell people. And I remember I would try and get it out sometimes. Like, I remember telling my sister when we were in the car one time, being like, I don't know, like sometimes he creeps me out or like whatever, but never actually saying the truth of like what was actually happening or how far it had gone. I think there's part of me that knew everything will change. Like I will lose everything. I might lose my church. I might lose my friend. I'll lose this family. Like it was like you've already lost so much. I think that was part of what kept me silent too, of like, what will my mom think? What will, like, there's all the shame, right? Of like, how could I have let this happen? I'm 14, 15. This only happens to children, just like lies. That it's like, I think there's something about like when you think of like sexual abuse and you think of teenagers, you're like, oh, it happens at parties with people their own age and whatever. And I think that was such a lie from the enemy and just shame of like, how could I have let this happen at 15? I'm like practically an adult, you know, and how it just felt even worse that it's like a man who's in his 50s and like it just, yeah, there's that shame of that. Finally, it progressed to a point one day where he had texted me and basically said like, I have something to give you. And I was like, no, you really don't have to, like whatever. And essentially what happened was we were at like a Memorial Day party at their neighbor's house. And I was at the point where I was gonna like break and say something. And he had given me a Victoria's Secret gift card, like for like $100 for my birthday, and gave it to me privately, like, and I just remember being like sick to my stomach. I was like trying to like ignore it again, and I turned on the TV, and but like the package was sitting right there, like this little Victoria's Secret box, and it had like a poem on it too. Like it was creepy. It was like just about like the innocence of love, and it was like a Lord Byron poem. It was like so gross. And I called my mom, was crying, like couldn't get the words out of what was actually happening. And then finally I said it, and my mom was like, oh my God. And she couldn't get home. So then my aunt came over, but my sister got home first. And I was in the bathroom, like not like throwing up, but just like hardest I've ever cried in my life was that day. And my sister came home with her friend, and then she was like, you need to go because something's going on. And my sister came in, and then I told her, and then my family came home, and I told them what was going on. And so it was kind of like the night of your nightmares has just like come to fruition kind of thing.
Were you met with shame?
Oh no, not from my family at all. And obviously, like, they were devastated, and it's betrayal, and it's all of those things. Like, my mom was so upset. But all of those lies about, like, they're just freaking lies. Like, I've heard so many girls say, like, I just don't want to tell my mom. Like, I don't know what she'll think of me. She will not think differently about you. Like, you know, that's literally just such a lie. We had a long conversation that night. We were trying to figure out, do we go to the police? Do we go to his wife? We just didn't really know how to handle it. And me and my mom, we like took a couple days to figure out like what to do. And I think we both just felt like, oh, we're not equipped to handle this. Like, we need to go to the police. And so then later that week, my mom pulled me out of school. And so like literally like this all happened the next day I'm at school. Like, it was just an awful time. And I go to the police station, and I have to tell them like the whole story. And basically it was kind of like my word against his. So we do this cool call where I have to pretend that I'm okay with it and get him to admit everything on the phone. So that was a whole nother traumatizing experience. Even when you come forward about it, like, there's still questions like, is this really true? Like, was this really happening? Because it doesn't make sense. Like, what's the reality doesn't make sense that you know about people. And it was, I think that's part of the denial. But the phone call confirmed everything and more. Like, that it was heading in a really horrible direction, that like everything, like all the fears and stuff, like you just always doubt yourself. But it was like, oh no, this is very true. And it was basically like the overall was like, oh, this was really bad. Like, and it was going to get worse kind of thing. That was like what I came out of it with. And I think like the assurance of like, I've done the right thing. They kept my phone that night and were texting him. So I don't know to this day like what they said. Essentially, they set up a meeting with him.
For you to meet him.
Mm-hmm. And he was arrested at my house like the next day. Like, they basically told our family like, you're going to want to be somewhere else at this time, this day. So my aunt took me and my siblings out to breakfast. My mom was at work, and he was arrested at my front door. And my friend had been asking me to come over and stuff. And I was like, I can't, like for days. And she was like, what's going on? And at school, she was like, what's happening? Like, why aren't you coming over anymore? And I was like, you need to ask your parents that question. Like, I can't do that for you. Then we had to go to the church and tell the church what had happened. And so then there was a service where the church announced what had happened, not with my name in it, but with his. So that started a very long journey for me and my friend.
Were they upset with you for blowing up their family, or they were like, yes, this is the right thing you should have done?
The blame can only be on him, right? Like, there's no blame for me. Like, didn't ask for that. So I think, I'm pretty sure that they both understand that. He eventually goes to jail. Like, I speak at his sentencing. Like, I give a victim impact statement. There's like, and then there's also like the whole healing process.
How long did he get?
3 months he served. He got 6 months and then it served half on good behavior.
Did that affect you, that was his punishment?
Honestly, no. Like, I think once the whole court process started and it became public, you just want it to be over. Yeah. Like, it was just awful. Like, and especially because court processes get dragged out, especially when it comes to sexual abuse and minors, because it looks better for the other side if the person in the room is older than 15, right? So we didn't have I didn't speak at his sentencing until my senior year of high school. And I came out about everything at the end of 10th grade. So there was a whole year-ish of just like dragging it out. And this huge weight just like hanging over our heads of like this thing happening in the background of my life for a year and a half. And so during my junior year, I basically walked away from the Lord. I was pretty angry at the Lord of like, I guess like the questions of like, why would this happen to me if God is so good and loving? Like, I think one of the things that suffering brought into my life, like, because essentially it was like I became a Christian, my dad left, my other dad like did this, I lost all my friends, like I lost another family. I feel like I've lost myself because you don't feel like you're ever going to be okay again. You don't feel like you'll ever be yourself again. You don't really see any hope for like your future. It felt like walking through like a bomb exploded in your life and you're just walking through like desolation. It was like, this has impacted every part of my life. I couldn't stay awake in school. Like, I was staying up all night doing homework. I had a job, like, because, we didn't have a ton of money and just felt like I needed to take care of myself and all that stuff. Basically what happened was I just started piling the weight on myself. If God's not taking care of me, then I have to do it. And there was no way, like, I wasn't even thinking about forgiving him. I wasn't thinking about any of that. And I think I thought maybe one day I will, but not yet. Like, I'm angry and I deserve to be angry. And like, I knew that the Lord was real still. And I knew that he was true. I just didn't like him anymore. Like, I was like, you're not the God that I want. And so I think what suffering brought into my life was an understanding that I had a perception of God that wasn't real. Like, I believed deep down, like, if God is good, he will bring good into my life. Like, if I am his, then he will only protect me. Then, like, I won't be hurt. I won't go through suffering. I won't. And that's just not the God that exists, right? Like, we live in such a broken and evil world. And this type of thing, like, my story is not uncommon, you know, like, and so, like, and worse. And I've met so many younger women, older women who have walked through awful, like, abuses. And so that's just not the God that exists, is the one that will give you a good life because you're a good person and blah, blah, blah. It's just like, that's not true. And so really what happened was I just had this disillusionment with, like, that was the God that I believed in, and then he didn't show up for me. So I was angry. So my junior year, I was like, well, I'd always wanted to fit in with all my friends and go partying and drink and, like, all of it. Like, I always felt guilty. So then my junior year, I finally gave myself permission. Like, I'm going to do life my way then, because this way sucked. But it's like, I was living such a half in, half out life, because I was also on, like, the student leadership team at church, and I'd be, like, partying Saturday night, and then I'd show up, like, hungover to our student leadership meeting at the youth group, and was just, because I knew that God was real, and all my friends were at church, right? So, and I had, like, friends at school too, but yeah, like, I was just so torn.
And did that affect your friendships?
Oh yeah, and especially with me and my friend, we weren't allowed to talk about the court hearing. And, like, we weren't allowed to talk about the court aspect of things. Like, so we like, just didn't talk about, we pretended like nothing happened for years. Like, it's insane when I actually think about it. So for years, we just pretended like nothing had really happened, even though everything had changed. People are depressed and sad. Yeah, for sure. And my friend, she kind of dealt with things by just putting, like, such a mask on. And I think she had forgiven her dad, and she was a lot quicker than I was with it. I just, like, watched her become, like, a shell of herself, where it was like she's joyful, and it was like nothing changed. But at the same time, like, the light is gone out of your eyes kind of thing. Like, we know it's not genuine anymore.
Well, what else are you supposed to do? You know, like, she couldn't talk about it, so
Right.
that was the only thing that was left.
Yeah.
So up until the point you came forward, you were the only person who knew, like, you just kept it to yourself until that one day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's a really, like, hard burden to carry completely alone.
I had to write in a journal for school. So we were supposed to write in it, like, every day. One of them was titled Metamorphosis, that we had to title them. And I remember talking about, like, how I felt like things were shifting inside of me, and it was painful, but it also felt like a good process. And it was just, like, being in and I was talking about, like, that kind of, like, that idea of, like, a cocoon and, like, a butterfly, like, working its way out of the cocoon. Like, I felt like the Lord was doing something good in me, but I was just still in pain and struggling, and yeah, like, and it hurt. So it was just, like, this spiritual experience of healing that was happening, but very slowly. And it kind of, and I think part of it was that I was talking to people about what was going on. I was meeting with a mentor. I was like, it was the first time I was really falling in love with God's word. There was a night where I got home, and my mom was like, hey, like, one of the lawyers wants to talk to you. And I was like, yay, you know, great. And one of the attorneys called me, and we were talking on the phone, and she's like, hey, like, just have some questions for you, like, because we were supposed to have the sentencing was coming, basically, but it kept getting pushed back. So I never really knew when it was supposed to actually happen. So it was at one of this time at the end of my junior year, it seemed like, okay, we were going to have the final thing soon. And so she was asking me questions about that. She was like, okay, so tell me how this has affected your life. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, like, how would you say that this whole process has affected you? And I was like, how has this affected me? Like, I just felt like the way she stated it was so simple, as if, like, oh yeah, like, it's hurt a little, you know, like, whatever, like, a few minutes. I was like, how has this not affected me? It would be, like, a better question. And I don't even remember what our conversation was like. I didn't say any of that to her, but I remember afterwards, I was, like, boiling. Like, I was so angry at the way that they had asked. I was like, do people not know? Do people really have no grasp of, like, what this feels like and what this does to you? And I was like, and I had never told the entire story except for to the police. and probably like to my family somewhat, but not like the whole thing. And I was just like, I couldn't get over it that night. And so I was in my room by myself, and it was like 11 a.m. or 11 p.m. And I took out a notebook and I just started writing like everything that happened to me, everything that I'd never spoken up about. I just started, like, it was like unfiltered for the first time, and just like poured it out on this notebook. And it was probably like 12 pages or so that I wrote. And I was just so angry. And I was basically answering her question of like, how has this affected me? And I said all those things. I was like, how has this not affected me? This man has stolen this has happened. Like, just talking about everything, and talking about how I miss my best friend and how he took her from me, and like all of these things. Like, just so real. I like sat and I wrote it all, and I like looked at it, and then I stuck it under my bed and never looked at it for like months. Left that there, basically forgot about it. Like, was never had any intention to look at it again, just wrote it, whatever. Then, so now I'm in my senior year. I go through that summer. I start dating one of my coworkers. So I'm kind of in this process of like, I like wasn't sure if I was ready, but I was like, I don't know. So I ended up dating this guy. But during that time, I think it was October of my senior year, finally, like, the deal's been done. Like, he's pled guilty, all of this stuff. And now it's really time for the sentencing. And so I was going to miss school, and I then found out that my best friend was going to be there, and her whole family. And then some of my youth leaders came to like support us too. But basically I was offered like, you can speak if you want, you don't have to. But I just knew, and I was terrified, but I just knew like, I want to speak, because I think throughout the whole process I'd felt so silenced. And mind you, like, I think there's almost no way to avoid that in regards to like, it's not like I wish that the newspapers had printed my name. It's not like I wish that, the whole church had known that it happened to me. But at the same time, it felt so much more shameful that it was like this big secret in my life. And I think the point was that I would be in control to be able to tell who I wanted to tell. But at the same time, my best friend, she was like, everyone knew what had happened to her, like with her dad. Not that like this happening to her, this whole situation, everyone knew because it was her dad and he was out in public. No one knew it was me. So there was just like this feeling of like alone and silenced, and people at school didn't know who it was, like, and my teachers didn't know what I was going through. Like, it just felt like I was carrying this huge burden, like walking around with this thing hanging over my head all day, every day.
Well, and all these people didn't know, so they expected you to be normal and function properly, and then you're like, wait, all of this is happening too.
Yeah, it was like a joke with my grade and my class and my friends, where like there were pictures of me sleeping in every single class. Like, I was just overwhelmed and burdened, and life was hard. I could not stay awake through a single class. Like, my friends would send me collages of me asleep in class. I like could not help it.
But none of your teachers knew?
None of my teachers knew, no.
So were you like doing badly in school?
I was driven by the lie of like, it's all on me. No one's going to take care of me, so I have to take care of me. So I busted my butt at everything I did. I stayed up through the nights, like doing homework, and then I slept all day during school. I was just running myself ragged through life, basically. I was involved in I think I started piling on weight in my life, and burdening myself, and driven by these lies of like not trusting that God is taking care of me, not trusting that, not fully anyways. Right. And so really it's like I would blame everyone else and hate everyone else because no one sees what I'm going through and no one will help me and all of these things. But I had at some point started making decisions where I was doing it to myself and making myself, it was like embracing the victimhood. I was bitter at my family because I felt like they didn't know how to talk to me, and it felt like it got ignored. But yeah, like I was just bitter. I was just bitter at everyone and everything. And it was just like this weird, like parts, like I was growing, but slowly, and I would take like steps forward and then come steps back. And so it was just a long process. So basically I wrote that letter. I came Months later, it was actually a sentencing. I knew I wanted to speak. My aunt's a therapist, actually. And she was like, well, let me, like, maybe I can help you figure out what you want to say. Like, let's meet at my office sometime, and like, we'll go over, you can just talk and we'll try and figure out like how you want to do it. And I was like, okay, like I'll probably need help because I had no idea what I wanted to say. And then I was like, well, like there was something I wrote like a while back, like, I don't know, maybe it'll be helpful. And she was like, yeah, bring it. Like we can read it, and it definitely might jog your memory on some stuff. And I'm like, great. So I go in my room, like almost hoping that it's not there, like this letter. I brought it to my aunt, and I'm in my aunt's office, and I'm watching her read this, and it feels like 30 minutes later, like just taking forever. And it's like the most vulnerable thing I've ever shared with anyone. And she's like reading it, she's crying, and she puts it down, she looks at me, and she's like, it's perfect, you have to read this. Like at the sentencing. I'm like, what? But I knew, I was like, she's right. Like, this is what I need to read. At the end of that letter, I wrote like about that moment and how the thing that I hate most about him is that he makes me feel weak. It was like me saying like, I am weak. Like, so sad and depressing. Like what I hate about him is that he makes me see that I'm weak and like essentially powerless, right? And that was how I felt. But since I had written the letter, I had more healing, and I had more like, I just had gotten to know the Lord deeper and had grown in my faith, and the Lord was starting to heal me. And so my perspective had changed. So I like added on to the ending, and I kind of like in my letter was like, this was, when I finished, I was like, that's the end of what I wrote on, April, whatever. Now I know that, and I kind of ended more on, Paul in 1 Corinthians, how he talks about like, when I am weak, then I'm strong. It's like, now I'll boast in my weaknesses that the power of Christ will rest on me. And I just felt like the Lord had given me a different perspective on weakness. And I was still getting there, like it was taking time, but I wrote a new ending about like, but now I know that when I'm weak, then I'm strong. That was such a turning point, I think, like finally being able, the verse that like stuck out to me that morning when I was terrified beforehand was where I think it's in Luke 8, where it talks about like everything that's hidden will be made known, and what's done in the dark will be like proclaimed in the light. And that's like what it felt like that morning, where it was like all this darkness, everyone, like the whole situation was confusing, and people didn't have both sides of the story, and just all this stuff. And it felt like this is my time where I get to say like how this has affected me and what this has done to my life and what God is doing now. And so it was like a really great turning point for me, healing wise. It affects so many things. I think sexual abuse, it's like the impact is so long and so to the core. I mean, it affected my relationship with boys my own age. It affected my relationship with my boyfriend my senior year. Like there was just so many, and then partying and the way I behaved, like so many effects.
How has it affected, like, I guess your view on sex and like intimacy afterwards?
I think it affects your view of love in general, because I essentially like started using guys for my own, like it was like guys have used me, so now I will start using them. Like this is all they're good for, kind of thing, or this is all they want anyways. And my boyfriend was great. Like he's such a great guy. I have nothing bad to say about him. I hurt him essentially, and realized like I didn't see a future with him. I still hated the idea of marriage. I still like commitment was scary, and so in my head we always were going to break up. Like there was always an expiration date. I started to realize like how selfish that is, that I like had started this relation, like we were just on totally different pages. And I started through like being mentored, through like walking through God's word, like I just started to be like, this isn't going to last and I'm wasting his time and it's selfish. And so then I ended up breaking up with him, and it like the first time he saw me cry in our relationship was when I broke up with him, because it was painful, and like the whole relationship I felt like I couldn't feel because I was still so numb. And finally it just dawned on me, like I was in real pain, like, and I thought I was going to be fine because I literally like was so numb to my feelings. And And then it was like, oh my gosh, I just like, it hit me that I'd really deeply hurt someone who's really like a great person. And I just finally became clear, like, I'm going to keep doing this if I don't choose to heal. Like, I wasn't going to therapy or anything. It was like, if I don't choose to start making different choices, I will do this again in my next relationship. I will keep hurting people. And that thought was so horrible to me that I finally was like, okay, I need to go to therapy. And honestly, like once I had ended it, like it was just like another step in the healing process where it was like the Lord was freeing up my life to make space for him to do something. Because I had quit a team I was on. I had lessened my hours at work. Like I felt like he was stripping all these weights off of me. And so I graduated high school in like such a different place with the Lord than I had been just a couple years before. I remember I wrote a journal after high school. And before I had always called God. Like he was just this distant creator. Like I didn't like know him personally. And I remember writing this journal about everything that I'd gone through in the last few years after high school. And I kept calling him Jesus. Like it was like I had gone from knowing God as this distant creator who like was sovereignly over my life but didn't really impact it much to like this is Jesus, like the one who I like, he knows me and I know him.
And with that, we're leaving you on a cliffhanger. Tune in next week to part 2 to hear how Michelle's story ends. Stay up to date on the next release by subscribing and following us on Instagram @Main Character Collection, where you can also find the link to purchase the crewneck Michelle designed. And as always, remember, your story has a purpose.